Welcome to this 2-day national seminar on relevance of organic farming in Indian agriculture, being organized by the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, on this lovely winter morning. We begin today's program with the inaugural session. May I request Ms. H.R. Meera to present an invocation. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request the dignitaries at this function to kindly come up to the dais. Dr. P.K. Shetty will accompany the dignitaries. Dr. Cloud Alvarez, Dr. G.K. Vasant Kumar, and Dr. Ramamurthy. I request Dr. P.K. Shetty to kindly bring our dignitaries onto the dais. Thereafter, we shall start with the invocation. Thank you, sirs, for doing us the honor. And now, may I request Ms. Meera to kindly present her invocation.
Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramekam niranandamanandam advaita purna param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema गुणातीतमानं चिदानन्दरूपं चिदाभासकं सर्वगं ज्ञानगम्यं गुणातीतमानं चिदानन्दरूपं चिदाभासकं सर्वगं ज्ञानगम्यं मुनिध्येयमाकाशरूपं परेशं परब्रह्मरूपं गणेशं भजेम मुनिध्येयमाकाशरूपं परेशं परब्रह्मरूपं गणेशं भजेम जगत्कारणं कारणज्ञानरूपं सुरादिं सुखादिं गुणेशं गणेशं जगत्कारणं कारणज्ञानरूपं सुरादिं सुखादिं गुणेशं गणेशं जगद्व्यापिनं विश्ववन्द्यं सुरेशं परब्रह्मरूपं गणेशं भजेम जगद्व्यापिनं विश्ववन्द्यं सुरेशं परब्रह्मरूपं गणेशं भजेम परब्रह्मरूपं गणेशं भजेम.
Thank you, Meera, for a very mellifluous rendering of the invocation to Lord Ganesha, the dispeller of darkness and obstacles. Thank you. We now have a very sweet piece of the program. We've arranged for a classical Indian bamboo flute by Sri Bharat Mansanta. I request Mr. Bharat Mansanta to kindly come onto the dais and present the flute performance. Thank you, Mr. Bharat, for that wonderful little start to our program after the invocation. Thank you once again. Now it's our pleasure to welcome our guests with floral bouquets, and I request Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, Director, NIAS, to kindly present a bouquet to Dr. Claude Alvarez, our chief guest, who is the head of Central Secretariat of the Organic Farming Association of India and Secretary and Executive Director, Goa Foundation. And I now request Professor V.S. Ramamurthy to kindly give out a bouquet to Dr. G.K. Vasant Kumar, Special Secretary to Government, Agriculture Department, Government of Karnataka. I request Ms. Meera to hand over a bouquet to Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, Director, NIAS. And Mr. Jagdish to present a bouquet to Dr. P.K. Shetty, Professor and former Dean, NIAS. Thank you all. I now request Dr. P.K. Shetty, as I said, Professor and former Dean, NIAS, and convener of the seminar, to give his welcome address and introduce the theme of the seminar. We invite all our distinguished guests on the dais to join in for lighting the lamp, thereby inaugurating the national seminar. Thank you. Thank you, dear distinguished dignitaries, for that auspicious start to this program by lighting the lamp. And it's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Shetty, as I said, to give the welcome address and to introduce the theme of the seminar.
Good morning. Dr. Claude Alvarez, Head of Central Secretariat of the Organic Farming Association of India, Dr. G.K. Vasant Kumar, Special Secretary to the Government, Agriculture Department, Government of Karnataka, Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, Director, NIAS, distinguished invited speakers of this seminar, renowned organic farmers from different parts of the country, delegates, invitees, colleagues from NIAS, representatives from electronic and print media, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to the National Seminar on Relevance of Organic Farming in Indian Agriculture. NIAS is one of the unique institutions in India conducting research in multidisciplinary areas. Agriculture is one of the key areas of NIAS program. Over the years, NIAS has contributed several books, peer-reviewed research papers, policy documents in agriculture sectors. We have completed numerous India-centric research projects of societal significance. We have initiated collaborative research program with many leading national and international institutions. We have organized many conferences on important issues in agriculture concerned with Indian and global society. This seminar is one such outreach activities of NIAS. Traditional farming involving traditional knowledge and practices were the original form of agriculture and have been practiced this for thousands of years. However, about 100 years back, some parts of the world extensively used industrial inputs to enhance the agricultural production. In India, 2 decades after independence, agriculture had a serious problem of meeting the demand of food of the growing population. And the humiliation of our dependence for food on the Western developed nations and the politics of food aid practiced by them added to our determination to be self-sufficient in food production in modernizing agriculture. Though it helped in enhancing the crop production and productivity, but there were concerns about environmental safety and sustainability of land productivity. In recent years, sustainable development has caught the imagination and action all over the world. Sustainable agriculture is necessary to attain the goal of sustainable development. Organic farming is one of the several approaches found to meet the objectives of sustainable agriculture. With increasing hazards caused by the use of synthetic chemicals in agroecosystems, organic farming provides an alternative option for sustaining the productivity of the crop and retaining the soil health. Today, organic farming is not just a philosophy or the age-old traditional farming, but it is a well-researched science that combines the knowledge of soil fertility, plant pathology, entomology, and other biological and environmental sciences. The relatively high success of organic farming in other countries are due to the high awareness of the health problems caused by the consumption of contaminated food products, the ill effect of the environmental degradations, and also appropriate support by the governments and organizations. Since 1990, worldwide, the market for organic food and other products has grown rapidly, reaching $63 billion in 2012. This demand has driven a similar increase in organically managed farmland. Between 2001 and 2011, organic farmland has increased at a compounding rate of 8.9% per annum. As of 2012, worldwide, about 37 million hectares were farmed organically, representing approximately 0.9% of the total global farmland. Organic agriculture is now a worldwide phenomenon which is practiced in 160 countries. As many young researchers are here, I would like to refer to a study conducted by the University of Oxford, United Kingdom in 2011 on global indices of leadership in organic agriculture. They have identified 12 indices of global organic leadership. According to the study, organic leadership is diversely distributed across the countries, large and small, rich and poor, developed less so, as well as across the linguistic and cultural barriers. Australia leads the world in organic agriculture hectares, maybe due to their pasture land. Finland leads in the organic wild culture hectares. China leads in organic aquaculture hectares. Portugal leads in organic forest hectares. Germany leads in biodynamic hectares and also publishing large number of organic research papers. India leads in number of organic producers. The Falkland Islands in terms of the percentage of agricultural land dedicated as organic. Denmark leads with the value of organic consumption per capita. Uruguay leads in the relative increase in organic hectares over the past decade. Finally, Japan leads in the number of organic certifiers. The overall global organic leaders on the basis of aggregated scores are Germany, India, and Denmark in a position of 1, 2, and 3 respectively. It would be interesting to note that about 1/3 of the world agricultural land and more than 80% of the producers are in the developing countries and emerging markets. However, market for organic sale are strongest in North America and Europe. The global market for organically produced food in 2005 was estimated $31 billion and is likely to increase to $102 billion by 2020. India's share in global market for organic food is currently less than 1%. There is a tremendous opportunity to increase this. Hopefully, India can soon become the leader in organic agriculture production and accelerate the growth towards the sustainable future. By looking at these developments, whether one likes it or not, the interest for organic farming and the demand for organic products are growing in this country and elsewhere in the world. It is important for science and scientific institutions to recognize this fact, to take forward organic farming movement by providing necessary support system, and if required, more research and innovations are needed to reorient and re-evaluation of certain practices in organic farming. Organic farming has many advantages such as energy efficiency, preservation of traditional knowledge, eco-friendliness, profitability, reduction and mitigation of carbon emission, and so on. However, there are various queries regarding the support to sustain the food security and nutritional quality, adaptability, organoleptic quality, certification, economic feasibility, resistant capacity towards pests and diseases. Keeping in view of some of these issues, NIAS is organizing this seminar in order to provide a healthy platform for discussion on various topics involving organic farming. Today, we are fortunate to have amidst us luminaries from the field of organic farming who have dedicated their lives for research, practicing, and promoting the cause of organic farming in this country. With a lot of efforts, NIAS brought them together in this forum. When you listen to each one of them, you will know their passion and commitment to this field. We assure you that the knowledge gained from this seminar will provide direction for organic farming and its significance in the future. We hope that at the end of 2 days deliberation, we may come out with specific recommendation and strategies to move forward organic farming in this country. I am grateful to our director, Professor Ramurthy, my colleagues and staff of NIAS for their support in organizing this seminar. I appreciate the support of N.R. Shetty and Krishna Prasad from Sahaja Samruddhi, Bangalore. The success of organic seminar, or this seminar, lies on active participation. I appreciate your overwhelming response and enthusiasm. Once again, I welcome each one of you cordially. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shetty, for that very warm welcome and for succinctly putting forth the objectives of this seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a little piece of deviation from program, that is a release of the book on innovations in agricultural policies. It is our immense pleasure on this occasion to release one of the books from NIAS on innovations in agricultural policies, edited by Dr. P.K. Shetty himself and Dr. M.V. Srinivasa Gowda, currently adjunct faculty, NIAS, and former professor and university head, Department of Agricultural Economics, University of Agricultural Sciences, Bangalore. This book contains lead papers from distinguished scientists, agricultural economists, and policymakers in the country. It has endeavored to garner the latest data on changing structure of the Indian agriculture that includes cropping patterns and many other developments that have taken place over the last 70 years or so. It also highlights the major handicaps faced by farmers and attempts to bring out the critical factors promoting or deterring the growth of Indian agriculture. More particularly, it emphasizes the policy imperatives necessary for sustainable agricultural development and offers several points for an effective policy to achieve them. The soft copy of the book will be available in the NIAS website immediately after release of the book. May I now request Dr. Claude Alvarez, our chief guest, to release this book and hand over the first copy to Dr. M.V. Srinivasa Gowda, and I also invite Dr. Gowda to come on to the dais. Dr. Srinivasa Gowda, to receive this. Thank you, sir, for according us the honor of releasing the book on this momentous occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my proud privilege to invite Dr. Claude Alvarez to deliver the inaugural address of this morning. Of course, Dr. Alvarez needs no introduction because we all know him about him so well. Nonetheless, here's a brief biodata. Dr. Claude Alvarez did his PhD at the University of Eindhoven, Holland in 1976. He's been involved in the promotion of organic agriculture since the mid-80s. He was a founder member of APIGR and then ARISE, ARISE. He now heads the Central Secretariat of the Organic Farming Association of India, OFAI. He is also the author of several books on organic farming, including the Organic Farming Source Book, the Organic Farming Reader, and he edits The Living Field on behalf of the association as well. He is also, as I mentioned earlier, the director of the Goa Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the address by Dr. Claude Alvarez.
Professor Ramamurthy, Professor Dr. Vasant Kumar, Dr. Shetty. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm sorry I'm not dressed appropriately because I know that you scientists attend these type of meetings with this type of air conditioning every other day. And so you take adequate precautions. Even Dr. Yadav and Dr. Bhattacharya, all these people are all old hands in this. But we don't attend seminars on a day-to-day basis, so we end up feeling extremely cold. So next time I'm going to come also in a tie and suit. I don't know what you do at NIES, but you maintain a very beautiful garden. And for that you should be complimented. I hope it's being done with organic manures. Well, Aaron, I have got what they call a PowerPoint presentation. I don't like PowerPoint presentations because they make people powerless and they make the speaker even more powerless. So I've only done it in pictures and I will release them on an appropriate stage. But I was supposed to address you on the organic farming movement in the country, and it's a great pleasure that I'm able to do so in the presence of so many luminaries from the organic farming field, from Dr. Devkumar, Suresh Desai, and Deepak Suchde, and Sundararaman, and Mr. Raghuvanshi here, whom I can recognize. So many extraordinary people who have lifted the organic farming movement into a different sphere altogether. I'm also delighted, since you are holding it here, that you are taking it seriously. For years, we have been tearing our hair out because the scientific community was curious but not taking organic farming seriously. And to have today a premier institution like the NIES now deciding to focus at least on this, I don't know whether it's a core area, I think you were objecting, whether it's a core area or not, but to focus on this, something for which we are going to be very grateful, because at least now what the organic farmers are doing can be validated by you folks. That sort of interaction has never happened. We have got a lot of agricultural scientists who visit fields, who laboriously take down notes and go back to their labs, and they say that whatever these guys are doing is quite fantastic, but we can't duplicate it in our labs because our system does not allow it to do so. And what has happened is, in the end, the organic farming movement has gone one way, and the scientific community has doggedly pursued the agenda that was given to them in 1966 in the form of the Green Revolution, and from which they have not departed, even though the Green Revolution is throwing up all the time numerous symptoms of profound ill health and disease and discomfort. And the latest pill that we are now getting to deal with the problems of the Green Revolution is now this GMO revolution, which is probably worse than the disease. In most of the cases that we know, the scientific community, as far as agriculture is concerned, has actually followed the organic farming community. And you can take any instances of this. The most important, I think, revolution that took place in organic agriculture was the creation of these formulas for generating and multiplying microbes for putting into the soil in the form of all these brews that farmers have been creating, from Panchgavya to Jeevamrut and so on. There again, it's a farming community which led the revolution, and then afterwards the universities of agricultural science in Coimbatore and so on began to do the documentation, and then they began to produce the literature and the documents and so on to show that this was indeed a very good thing. I mean, Dr. Dev Kumar is also here, who did some of these studies. If you take SRI, intensive agriculture, cultivation of rice, which began with rice and now is being applied to wheat and millets and so on. Again, it is the organic farming community which led. And then the scientific community was very resistant. And they said, no, this has not come from IRRI and from our godfathers, so there's something wrong with it. But eventually, because the farmers ignored them and continued, they had to follow. And now you find agriculture departments in Goa, in Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu and so on, actively supporting SRI. But the thrust of what I'm saying is that it's the farming community which is leading as far as technical innovation is concerned, and not the scientific community. There's some misfit here, there's something wrong here. And that should be remedied. Maybe an institute like NIS can find out what exactly has gone wrong and why this extraordinary way of producing food, which does not destroy the soil, in matter of fact enhances the soil, which produces safe food, which is not at all available with chemical agriculture. Why is this not becoming the focus of agricultural departments, of agricultural universities, and so on? As a matter of fact, when we were discussing these matters with the Ministry of Agriculture, I remember the Special Secretary of Agriculture telling us that Government of India, and Dr. Yadav will bear me out on this, he was director of the National Center of Organic Farming, when we had the first meetings on PGS, and he said very clearly that Government of India is convinced about organic farming. Don't expect us to give up chemical farming, he says. Don't expect us. But we are so convinced about organic farming that we will try and work out a procedure that if any time a farmer goes to an agricultural station or an agriculture department and asks for information on organic, he will be given that information. And if he asks for information on chemicals, he will be given that information. But it will be on 50-50 basis. We are not committing to either this or that, but our research and our extension system will be based on both organic and chemical farming to an equal extent. Unfortunately, that statement which we made about 8 or 9 years ago has not been implemented by the Government of India. And I think that's one of the sorriest promises that was made. And if institutions like NIS do really take up this matter and provide that critical support to the organic farming movement, at the entire country and the country's agriculture would really be put on a trajectory of growth which nobody will ever be able to follow. The movement as such, I have done a paper for this, and I don't like reading papers. So I suppose at some stage NIS will give you the paper so that you can read it. But what I've done is I have very dutifully provided in detail the way in which the organic farming movement started in India, how it worked through different associations and so on, and how in the end the Government of India actually turned around and began to promote organic. Now, the motives were not exactly very compelling in terms of science. It was only compelling in terms of the commerce involved in organic farming. When the Government of India did find that many consignments were being rejected by Europeans because they had too much of pesticides in them, then they decided to take organic farming seriously. And they set up this entire enterprise of organic farming purely for the purpose of exports. This is a remarkable thing, I myself am not able to understand the schizophrenia, but the entire promotion of organic for the government of India was hosted not by the Ministry of Agriculture, by the Ministry of Commerce. And this has remained true till today. The Ministry of Agriculture, the Indian IRI, ICAR still do not want to adopt and host organic farming. It is being hosted by the Ministry of Commerce. APIDA, which controls exports, organic and exports, is also part of the Ministry of Commerce. And the National Center of Organic Farming is not being integrated into the Indian agricultural research system, but is being kept aside as a cousin, a remotely related cousin, but not being brought within the framework of organic agriculture, despite the fact that this is probably the most scientific way of raising our food. Now, I have a very brief presentation here, which I normally make to most of the meetings where I go, because nowadays we have the phenomenon of being ruled by the educated class and by people who have been through an education system, which probably has got them has convinced them that plants do not grow any longer in the modern age without chemicals. This is a remarkable discovery that I have found even among policymakers of the government of India, and sometimes even among the farming community, who will tell you that unless we put some urea or unless we put some fatal combination of NB, NPK, there's no way, there's no need, you shouldn't try even to do agriculture. It's an amazing revolution in consciousness. It's downgrading actually consciousness, because for 5,000, 10,000 years and even longer, nature has survived very well and farmers have survived very well without NPK. They have survived. We were producing good amount of food even without NPK up to 1966. So where has this connection come between chemicals and food and the growing of food? I have not been able to find some explanation for it. But let me give you some example about how nature actually farms, because one of the main assumptions under which farmers do their farming is that the best farmer today is natural systems. You can't really replicate. No scientist, no scientific community, no forestry community has been able to replicate the fantastic productive capacities of natural systems. Whether it's the oceans, whether it's the forest, whether you take the Amazon system. I ask my friends usually, as a method of disorienting them, did you find anybody in this forestry system going and putting chemicals and fertilizers or spraying this forest? How does this system survive? It does not require the assistance of human beings at all. As a matter of fact, when human beings get into the system, they start demobilizing it and they start cutting it down to put up cattle ranching for producing American Mac burgers and things like that. But otherwise, how does it function? And why don't we learn how these systems function? These are all natural forests that grow up without any inputs from any human resources. This is my own forest in Goa, in Molem, which is one of the largest forests in the state. And I don't find even the forestry department doing anything with it, because the forestry department's only job is to protect it. And it grows by itself, it takes care of itself, it doesn't have any diseases. And nobody says that it's producing less. The amount of biomass it produces can drown the entire population of Goa with just the quantity of biomass that's coming out from those leaves. And nature doesn't leave any place. I have this plot now next to my house, which every year dries up. But in the month of June, after about 15-20 days of rain, this is what it looks like. Nature doesn't leave any place if there's sufficient water and sufficient amount of nutrition in the ground. It doesn't leave it uncovered. It will produce something. It's like children. Children are natural learners. They want to learn. It's only people who have got an educational system that will ensure that once they get into it, they stop learning. It's a natural thing of human children to learn, and it's a natural thing of nature to keep producing it, particularly in a climate like India with the type of rain. It will produce. You will find that though we, in our gardens, we will try it, put a seed in a pot and give it fertilizer and water and all that, and still nothing grows. You'll find that in a broken down building, in a crack of a wall, you will find that a plant is growing. Who put it there, how it came and all, we don't know, how it is growing and who's giving it nutrition, but it grows completely. This is nature at its best. You don't have to tell it where it should grow and how it should grow. It's only if you don't understand the principles of growing, then you'll have problems. And the problems will be afterwards, okay, what type of plants do we put, and monocultures, and then the pesticide problems, and the imbalances that are created because of monocultures and the way we are doing things and so on. Now, our organic farmers follow these principles. Some of our best organic farmers follow these principles. Now, this is an organic farm producing cardamom and cocoa and pepper and all that in Coorg. And when you're walking in it, you don't realize it's a forest. It's part of a forest. It's producing biomass, but in the form of the things that we normally appreciate. But it's a mixed thing. You don't have a single crop dominating the scenario. And this is Nandish. I think is Nandish come to this meeting. He was supposed to come. There he is, as ever. This is I think this is Nandish's farm. He has in his areca nut, he has 80 different types of legumes growing, and they all run a riot. And he is very happy. You can see him smiling, because he has created a soil which is very close to the forest soil. That's how forest soils look like. They've got an undergrowth, they've got continuous biomass creating. This is what it should be. This is what good soil should be. Once you have this type of soil, then you don't require anything. I remember a lot of farmers with the association 15, 20 years ago, they began by putting in compost, then they began with panchgavya, then they did all sorts of things for many years. They did no-till farming and all that. And now they have reached a stage where they tell me that now we really don't need to put any external inputs. Our soil is so good that we get every year whatever we want, because we return what we don't want to soil. Our soil is this good, it is looking after itself, it's well aerated, density is appropriate to allow all types of things to aeration to take place, and moisture is being kept very well under control through the use of mulches, by keeping the soil covered like a forest does. Of course, normal farms have everything. It's only conventional farms that don't have anything. But they have even termites. I mean, one of our organic farms, 3 or 4 of them actually, use termites and use dry mass, because termites are extraordinary farmers. And if you dissect the stomachs of termites, you will find that they produce the same enzymes as those which are produced by cows. And we have found that wherever there are termite mounds, plantations do very well. And scientists have found that under the Amazon forest, there's a whole gallery of termites. Galleries and galleries about termites. But we have again, just like for many years our farmers were told that earthworms are bad for farming, we are told termites are bad for farming. But here is farmer using actually raw material and encouraging termites on his farm, because termites will create extraordinary aeration systems so that your roots of your plant can breathe, and the atmospheric gases can get to your roots of your plant, so that you have very good production. And most of the farmers literally grow like this. I mean, they grow several types of crops. I don't know how good the reproduction is, but if it is, sometimes you can't walk on the floor, because the floor is entirely covered with these type of plants. Sometimes you have, from 30 to 40 different types of crops growing on 1 acre of land. Then you will have amaranthus, castor, and turmeric all being put together, and each one all has a symbiotic relationship with the other, helping. You will have castor and banana, or you will have sugarcane, and you will have Augusta and all sorts of other things, but no part of the soil is left uncovered. as in a forest. You don't leave it uncovered. Because if you leave it uncovered, then you have all these problems. The sun will get at you, the microbes will disappear, the earthworms will go, the soil will get dry, and as it is, all the life in the soil will begin to go away. Just like whenever there's a desert, there's very little life. In a soil which is exposed to the sun without any protection, you will have a continuous decrease in the living population. And it's living populations that actually produce all that the plant, the crops require. Now you would think that this is jungle, but this is one of the most extraordinary vegetable gardens in Auroville, done by friends of ours. And this is a kitchen. This is my kitchen garden outside my own bedroom, where I have 8 or 9 different types of vegetables, all growing at random. But they are keeping us going, and we don't have to go to the market. So rubber plantation, again with a very good amount of, and this is the mulching system. This is an old picture of Sundaraman. I think Sundaraman is there in the audience, and he will speak to you this evening. But he is Professor Emeritus of Organic Farming. He doesn't have that title, but we have long ago given it to him, because even at his age, he's continuously evolving new techniques, new experiments, and teaching farmers. You talk about agricultural universities, which people don't visit nowadays unless they have to go and get a degree. But there are people who land up on his farm and on Suresh Desai's farm and Subhash Sharma's farm just because they want to learn. And these farms have become extraordinary learning centers for the populations of the farmers around them. You see, they take mulching in a very dedicated way. In Punjab and many other places, they will burn. There's a culture of burning, but not in the south. In the south, you'll have fellows going with their tractors to farms and taking away all this material and putting it in their fields, because they don't want any of it to be destroyed or taken, lost. Here's a very good mulching system for sugarcane. Whatever the lops and tops you put back into the soil, because there are many things in a plant that are returned to the soil from the plant. There are many things that are taken away when you take away the plant. And it's important, therefore, for mulching, for putting back your residue, because that, again, restores many of the elements that the plant would require for its growth. You have banana plantation very well mulched. And you have people who now create trenches, they put all the organic material and they just water those trenches. They don't water coconut trees. They water trenches between coconut trees. And the coconut trees do very well, because I have seen roots of coconut trees going from where I am standing to where Professor Ramurthy is. That is the extent to which the roots of coconut trees go when they know there's a source of water there. So there are farmers like this who do all types. Here's a very good mulching system for banana and for other crops. You have the coconut plantation filled with mulch. I mean, he's not misusing those leaves. He's allowing them to rot there eventually, and to protect that soil and to protect the humidity and the microbes and the earthworms in the soil. That is what the mulching system does. For a mango tree, they will be using this. This is a sugarcane crop, again, used as mulch. And these are fields where these are things that farmers are doing now as a matter of common wisdom. You don't have to teach them anything. It's only people who want to keep their farms very, very clean and who don't want any organic matter on it. And that's a different type of agriculture. But on organic farms, this is not the case. This is a brinjal plantation, again, with mulch and so on. And if you look at the soils in between, it's all dark, black, as exactly what you would get in a natural forest. This is tapioca, even mulched, by a farmer. And so you have the microbe that has come back, and the farming community, which now everybody is involved in this. I mean, originally the Green Revolution was you got your urea and your phosphate and whatever it is from these plants which have been set up as a result of the Green Revolution all over. And these get imported material from the Gulf in the form of naphtha, do all the cracking, produce all these petrochemicals and all that. Of course, causing a lot of pollution also in the bargain. And so expensive in the end that they have to be subsidized. And now reaching scandalous levels of subsidy, so that even the government of India and the World Bank says that this is not a good thing to do at all. You better start reducing. But as you start reducing people's dependence on this, then the production goes down, because you've told them that their production depends on putting more and not less into their soils. But Panchagavya gets people unhooked from this type of agriculture. And it's, again, as I said, a common wisdom all over the countryside. Everybody does it. Yeah, I mean, if you go to an organic farm or even to some other farm, they'll ask you, have you done Panchagavya? What is the quality of your Panchagavya? And we had a conference last year in Erode where we had 600 farmers who came to exchange notes on what they had achieved with their Panchagavya solutions. How they had experimented, what new materials they had put into it for fermentation purposes, and what was the effects of it. Now, mandatory now is these type of bins, collection tanks, etc., where Panchagavya is routinely made, Jivamrut is routinely made, and what's more important is that the cow, which was going to slaughterhouses, is now once more being valued. Even if a cow's leg is broken, they say, never mind, we'll look after it because at least we get Panchagavya out of it. Milk is becoming secondary. It's the nutrition for the soil that you get from the microbes which are associated with cow dung that are once again being appreciated by everybody. So cows are being kept. It's still not a great drive because I can tell you we are still exporting most of our animals. The statistics that Dr. Shetty read in his welcome address before I came in, we are actually today the largest exporter of animal meat in the world. We export 1.5 million tons. Australia comes second with 1.4 million tons. So actually we have imported fertilizer plants, but we are exporting our indigenous fertilizer plants in the form of dead meat to all over the world. You got to examine the collective sanity of this exercise, but that's what we have got into. And you find people, women, whenever we have these workshops, you have people who come and who want to be shown, Chinese farmers coming to India to learn how to do Panchagavya, and farmers themselves innovating in how to introduce Panchagavya in their fields. Now you have this very elaborate system where the water will suck in the Panchagavya from these tanks and take it directly to the fields. And then you have Panchagavya, different types of solutions, some with buttermilk, some with, I don't know what other things they do. But this is mandatory now on all organic farms. And no organic farm really wants to look at a chemical fertilizer plant again. Or they don't want to look at an agriculture which is based on chemicals anymore. This is a variety of people and all doing it themselves. And very often it's women who are doing it. It's not the men folk who are doing it. The women have the patience to, because it has to be stirred and oxygenated, for at least 15 to 20 days before it is of use. I think this is the only good thing about the Industrial Revolution, that is produced these cans which can be used by Panchagavya. I mean, you can't get this equipment in the market, but I mean, they are innovating. They're creating their own systems for distribution of Panchagavya to soils. And you think that, oh, this is a fantastic farm, but it's actually mixing Panchagavya with water and dishing it to all the farms. And it's done by the farmer himself as a great innovator who is learning how to do things for himself. And then they put Panchagavya even in banana bunches. When the flower is there, they cut the flower off and they put it, so they get a uniform banana formation. And then you find some of these are all the productions that we get from Panchagavya use. Even when you use it for vermiculture, mangoes, drumstick trees, 2 to 3 meters tall drumstick trees, tapioca, rice, cashew, limes. I mean, it's weird what Panchagavya has done to the countryside. It's just taken it away from chemicals altogether and made food safe once more to eat. Because once you use Panchagavya, plants are always, as you said, in very good health, don't need that much don't need pesticides at all. And because the cropping system is also no longer at monocultures, it's not subject to this type of insect attacks which devastate farmers in many of these other areas. And then composting, normal composting that farmers do, some of it very laborious, but still being done, because you have to return this matter to the soil. This is what we lost when they told us that you don't need to do all this work, you just need to take this bag of 50 kgs of urea and just throw it in your fields. And farmers innovating in terms of, this is Subhash Sharma's farm, which is a great work of art because he begins his farm from contours. He says the farm has to survive on water, so I will design my whole farm so that not a single drop of water is lost and every bit is utilized. These are all the products of organic farming, and I still sometimes have farmer people who tell me, but do you think organic farming can feed this country? I said, this is all produced by organic farming. It's not produced by chemical farming. You go to chemical farms, you won't get this type of luxuriant growth. You will get all sorts of attacks. You will get a lot of bad leaf. You will get contaminated leaf. You will get traces of pesticide on it because sometimes the farmer has used too much of chemical and it has burnt it and so on. But these are all pictures that I take when I go visiting organic farms. This is maize. This is organic wheat, rice. You see on the right side is organic, on the left side is chemical. Mukundan, this is Kailash Murthy, another one of our good organic farmers. Then millets at Gloria Farm, organic sugarcane. Then banana, look at a banana, it goes to the center of the earth. This is the length of the bunch. Papayas. Can you get this type of production from chemicals? Jackfruits. We are the largest producer of organic jackfruit in the world. The value of the jackfruit that we produce in India, in one state alone, the state of Karnataka, in value is equal to the entire organic export from India to Europe. Have you ever seen a single person putting chemicals for jackfruit and pesticides for jackfruit? Dates. Even organic tulsi, one of the big multinational enterprises now from Lucknow, India Organic, chilies, onions, mangoes, sunflower, all grown organically. You try this with chemicals, you will never succeed. This is Subhash Sharma with his watermelons, this melons. And here you have, these guys are so crazy, they're growing rice now out of bags. The last time we had a meeting at the UAS, we had two seminars. One was a seminar organized by our association at the University of Agricultural Sciences. And there was another conference being organized by another group on the other side of the campus. And the university agricultural scientists, the vice chancellor was sitting in our hall, and he was amazed because he says, why aren't we doing all this? Why are all these interesting things being done by these farmers? And why are we doing something else? And he couldn't understand, and he sat through most of the proceedings trying to figure out why these people were good. And you look at the Panchagavya revolution, you see it being matched by the vermiculture revolution. Now, I don't think any of you have seen the scale of vermiculture that's been taking place. Now, this is apart from the fact that you should not introduce, exotic worms, you should not introduce outside materials and so on. But I'm talking about farmers as an innovative community which is thinking for itself for the first time and not following anymore what somebody else was telling them. These are all different types of vermiculture units which I've collected. They grow it in any place. They grow it in pots, in sacks, this is vermiwash. Women who have become perfect vermiculture specialists, they prepare it on huge scale. This is material which you feed to the earthworms. That is organic, cow dung mixed with biomass. And you have entire plantations which are becoming vermiculture because all that residue from the worms directly goes and feeds the coconut trees. And if you ask agricultural universities to do it, they won't be able to match the scale at all. They use all types of materials. They will not go for standardized materials. Look at the designs of all the beds that they use. Some of them are, high class. Some of them are ordinary. But there's an explosion of people working with earthworms. I have seen zoology professors from Coimbatore University sitting with, organic farmers from Trichur and taking notes. Because from looking at the earthworm, they tell you what type of species of these, whether they are excavatus or whether they are perionyx or whether they are Eudralis or Eisenia fetida or something. They can just tell you by looking at them. And the professors don't know how to identify those type of worms anymore. And of course, seeds. Now, I'll stop here because I've got 5 or 10 minutes left. The point that I'm trying to make is that science only imitates nature. Science doesn't substitute for nature. And sometimes I get agricultural scientists who come and tell me, has this been validated by science? It is almost as though they are telling me that science is something created by human beings as a system of understanding, which is somehow superior to nature. I mean, it's not possible. I mean, even as a methodological assumption, you can't accept it, because after all, we are part of nature. We are small inputs in nature. We are creations of nature ourselves. And all of our science is basically an effort to try and understand the workings and principles of nature, whether it's a physics, galaxies, or whether it is soil, how plants function, how plants do, how plants get their nutrition. Now, all that we know from the best of our science about plants is that they don't get normally all their nutrition from the soil. You have a discussion with any botanist and ask you where do the plants get their nutrition, and standard scientific theory, which has not been given up by anybody, not even by God till today, is that 97% of the nutrition of plants does not come from the soil, it comes from the atmosphere. 44% carbon, 44% oxygen, 15% nitrogen, 95 to 97% comes from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Now, why is it that we have turned agriculture upside down and begun to assume that we should put 95% of the nutrition of the plant in the soil? Why did you do, and how did this happen? And the best of agricultural scientists telling you today that plants can't absorb this. So 50 to 60% of the output of all your NPK plants in this country, for which we are paying huge amounts in foreign exchange, actually landing up in water bodies and in rivers and in the sea. It's the largest amount of pollution that's taking place. Forget about the pollution that's produced by industries, is marginal compared to the pollution that we are doing through this NPK, so-called NPK revolution, by ensuring that these soils, first of all, because they have to be in dissolved state, are automatically going to, because plants can't. And one would ask, why would you want to do something? Why would you do something when nature is already doing it very well? And as if you have put them in an ICU. Do we rear our children in ICUs? If we don't, why are we raising plants that way? And why don't we just try to understand, if plants are doing this already and the microbes in the soil are doing this already, then why don't we do what the organic farmers do? That's to ensure that the soil is living, it's got all the microbes that it requires, the environment of the microbes and the termites and the earthworms is protected so that it does not deteriorate, and then nature does what it does best, and it has been doing best for so many years. It produces food that human beings want. These are questions that I am posing. Unfortunately, I also have a PhD from a technical university, which I deserted long time back. But I think before I conclude, our cardinal problem with our science, and I have to say it in an institution like the NIS, is that we simply bother too much about physics and chemistry because the Europeans were doing it, when we should have really been working with biology, botany, and plants. This is our world. This is our world. We are a very fertile land. We live in communities of living beings, microbes, earthworms, termites, birds, insects, all these. We have to be able to function and to use all those creative energies in synergy. But unfortunately, we thought that physics was the most important thing. I'm not saying that physics is, I do not know many of the things that physics has done, whether they have been useful to the food that we are eating today. But as far as this is concerned, even now, if we can alter and modify the paradigm of scientific research to look once more at the science of living, science of life, how life is born, how it can be protected and conserved, and how it multiplies, and nature is the best example, then I think we would have an extraordinary science. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez, for that brilliant, thought-provoking and stimulating address. I now invite Dr. G.K. Vasant Kumar, Special Secretary to the Government, Department of Agriculture, Government of Karnataka, to kindly deliver special remarks. Dr. Vasant Kumar.
Good morning to everybody. Distinguished delegates on the dais, and today's chief guest, Dr. Claude Alvarez, and director of this institute, Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, and the former dean and the professor, Dr. P.K. Shetty, and delegates here. Many of the formers are here, my friends are here, some of my teachers are also here. I really don't know what kind of special remarks I can give after the brilliant presentation by our chief guest, and quite an introductory welcome by Dr. P.K. Shetty, and I have seen a lot of other lectures by Galaxy of People, but somehow I have been asked to do this. I've also been associated with this movement at least from 1993-94. So before becoming the secretary here in the secretariat, I was director of horticulture, and before joint director. My interest started here. Yes, I'm also a student of Agriculture University. Our time, it is organic was not spoken. It was in the back seat. So that was the time when Green Revolution began, and we were all taught about high-yielding varieties, use of fertilizers, use of irrigation, pesticides, grow more. It was more production oriented, and that's how our priorities and thought went in that direction. But even during that time, as a student, something was lingering in my mind, that I come from Western Ghats. As our chief guest said, it's a forest area. My father is also an agriculture planter. We never used fertilizer during that time to raise best of the nurseries and plants in the field. They used to say, bring jungle soil, cardamom, then put it in the bamboo baskets and directly sow the seeds of coffee and also orange or even nurseries. It used to come up very well, and there was no need for applying any of the either chemicals, very healthy seedlings. And for a very long time, till jungle soil started disappearing and going far and far off from our close fields, it was being done. But then, of course, we drowned in our own farming systems, and our early extension are all on, I agree that on the so-called modern farming, then called modern farming, contrary to the conventional farming where only the farm-made manure was used. I still remember some of my uncles who were there in agriculture department. They were telling that to carry fertilizer in the cycles to tell the farmers that this has to be applied, and farmers to say that this is burning. Farmer not accepting it. I think it is we who put it on the farmers, so that was the time when we thought that unless we do the intensive cultivation, the farming cannot produce more. Of course, the whole system was tailored for high-yielding varieties, fertilizer and all. Somehow during my stay in Shimoga in 1990, when shortage of everything came, like every time a monsoon comes, There will be hue and cry, seed supply is not there, there will be people queuing, not for technology, for getting these seeds at a subsidized rate. And fertilizer shortage will be there, there will be hue and cry to stock all these things in the godown, and pressure for every officer is on storing these things. Then pesticides. Then again complaints, there is pilferage of this fertilizer, it's not good, mixed, then pesticide is not of quality. So we felt, how do we, it is more than serving the farmers in terms of technology, it is managing these things which had become most people's thing. At the same time, when we went round the field, and there we saw some group of farmers who are not bothered about government department, nor these fertilizers, nor pesticides, still happy. One such farmer whom I met is Dr. Purushottam Rao. He is known as the father of at least modern organic farming. There are many others silently cultivating in his field here, and he casually invited me, come and see my field. I went to his field. He had a beautiful arecanut garden. Those days he was growing the vanilla crop and so many other herbs and spices and all. So, and he showed me what he's doing. He had a batch of cattle and a manure. And then he said, what are you doing? So what is this manure? He was using those days pouring milk on that farm at manure field and honey and all. I didn't know why is this used, but he said, whatever I am doing, I am getting best of my yield. I don't have to spray most of the pesticides. I'm making my own thing. That attracted and made me, when I saw and studied the yield, it was quite good. But that gave us much more enthusiasm and confidence that this can be done. Coming back to, as Dr. Claudius said, that organic farming is not something new, but it is mentioned in our ancient literature, Vriksha Ayurveda, where they say, I mean, the whole system analyzes and tells so many small articles, it's a bigger one in Sanskrit, and many other articles. One such thing in Vriksha Ayurveda is Upavana Vinoda. It's on landscaping. And they were doing landscaping using, there was a science systematically documented what kind of, how to select the soil, how to improve the soil, what kind of pest management, every seed selection, everything is mentioned. I think this literature goes back to 1000 BC or before and practiced quite till 400, 450 AD. But somehow after that it didn't continue, like any of our best of our literatures which was there, like our regular Ayurvedika, Charaka, whatever you say, some reason or other we didn't continue. We mechanically followed them without understanding the scientific basis of it. Suppose we had continued further evolving and research on those things and continued those practices, the problem of food shortage which we faced in 1950s and 60s wouldn't have arisen. So suddenly when we felt the shortage and we had to go with a begging bowl all over the world, so when the world gave us the message, these are the high-yielding varieties, this is thing, we went by that. And in the late 1980s, again we noticed, as I told you, what was the damages also causing when we don't look at the sustainability. So chemical farming also was used mindlessly, that our aim and idea was only to produce more. We expanded agriculture, we introduced the thing, and extensive use of these chemicals started showing results of problems. Yes, it's governments. I agree that being a government, we agree. We also went in that direction. Even farmers also wanted this only. Even today, we say that in many places we are not caring for resources. Today, it has come to an alarming situation where all our natural resources are used at 1.5 times the renewable capacity. With that, they say there will be acute shortage of most of the natural resources, and some may even get extinct in next 30 years. This is a study. And with this, of course, then it's time that we all look at more sustainable farming, where we conserve our natural resources, where we select our crops carefully. We go back to our systems which our ancient sages told. Of course, in fact, there is also in this literature, they say why sages were living in the forest. They say that is the one place, it is not only for spiritual, for every type of living, it is giving them that kind of knowledge and inputs to continue and bring something new. So, see, once again, I can tell you that the concept of food processing, very ancient, It started from hunter gathering, then it was shifting cultivation, that is normal cultivation. Then we called so-called intensive cultivation, where we called it modern farming. Now again the thought is going back to this sustainable farming, where we all have to look very, very carefully, how do we conserve our resources? How do we make our planet eco-friendly? How do we make mankind more healthy? See, organic farming, it's not just certain actions which we do, it is more of our consciousness. It is unless everybody takes it to their heart, because we say that in a science in biology, a field like agriculture requires science, I agree, and art also skill, because I said it requires more than that, it requires passion. If all of us put our hearts, then of course the heart of agriculture is agriculture of the heart. That's the saying. So with that, I think definitely I'm very happy that I'm seeing some of them today. Yeah, in 93, 94, when we had a seminar on medicinal plants, some of us took that at least in a plants like medicinal plants, we shouldn't go for application of pesticides and fertilizers, because it's the medicines which we derive from them. But there was a lot of bouncers from my own colleagues. No one was ready to accept it, and especially to talk it on a dais like this. It was, they were not agreeing. You cannot, they were telling. If you want, you can discuss in the closed doors or something. So some of us who raised that topic had to receive bouncers, and it was not taken very well. But today, from 94, nearly 20 years later, there has been such a steady progress in this field. We can any day talk on this and dais like this. We can take this movement further. There are people like our chief guest who confidently says that we need to promote this again as that, and we are seeing the perils of the other farming. So I do say that though a lot more has to be done in this field, we have come a long way. In terms of physical hectareage in area, which I don't want to give, also there is a leaps and bounds. Karnataka itself is having more than 1 lakh hectares, and in India it is 45 lakh hectares, and it's growing heavily. Even demand is growing at the rate of 20-25%, though a modest estimate of 8%. In some places it's very high. So it's really an achievement from those days to here, and people are welcoming it. But still a lot of loose ends are there. Whether the belief in authenticity or continuous supply of these materials, many people are scared, where is the market? On the other hand, there are people who are asking, where is the supply? It's not that on a particular day you supply that and then you don't continue. There are certain things, issues at government level also we are thinking. So we formed in 2002, I think, we formed a Jaivik society which was run by the farmers. And still now the state government has announced Savaya Bhagya, where we want to introduce more and more hoblis and villages to bring under this. So anyway, there is state government is also very much interested to do it. I fully understand that in a complex society and complex government systems, we straight away cannot drive this alone, though state has this mind. But definitely we want to say that state is very much interested to promote this eco-friendly agriculture, which is required not only for health of the mankind, for the health of our planet. So there are many scientists who ardently say that, and slogans you also know that our primary health care should begin on the farm and in our hearts, and not in the laboratory. I think this is very well illustrated earlier also, our speaker. So the demand for organic is to have not only poison-free food, clean air, our fresh water, soil, everything. So when health is absent, definitely our productivity will come down. Definitely one of the things which we have to aim is providing healthy food. In this organic farming gives a lot. So you all know that there are savings, that all this land doesn't own, no farmer can own it, none of us own it. They say it's all leased from our ancestors, and we have to take it to next generation as healthy as possible. We have no right to overuse the things and spoil it and then give it next, so that a poisonous land is given to them which produces food which is not very healthy. And when healthcare is becoming more and more expensive, it's time that we look at all these things and certainly look at a more healthy farming. And organic farming it's not only just cultivation, it's preservation of biodiversity, it is conservation of our environment. And us, of course, like any other system, this also is facing certain challenges. It's not the same. Though yes, ardent farmers who are practicing on their own are doing it, even the so-called raw material, organic raw materials which we have to pose in city, there are some places which are blessed with nature where you get a lot of organic waste. A place like Goa, the place where I have come from, Coorg, and a lot of rainfall, regeneration is quicker. But there are many dry lands. Of course, there might have been good vegetation once upon a time. Due to over of resources, the total biofuel, biomaterials have gone. It's time that it takes a lot of time to regenerate them. So all efforts have to be done to regenerate in these areas. Of course, when forest, it has taken years to regenerate and produce that soil. But now we have used, overused, misused, and produced our soil which is not having that kind of resource. And if we take steps of regeneration of these things, I think we'll be doing a human service to the farming community and also to the human mankind. At least the future generations won't suffer from the so-called food with pesticide residues. As our guest also said, Chief Guest, a lot of ancient knowledge, wisdom, everything is there. There are many people who are practicing. What is lacking maybe documentation and awareness. We may have to take a lot more steps to bring awareness on this kind of success stories and the possibilities. And it's a job of our scientists. Already many are doing it. Many more have to do it to take it to the next level where this, as we faced acute problems in 60s when we came out with Green Revolution, today we may have to call a revolution which is beyond Green Revolution, where we take care of not just that particular thing, where it is more sustainable, which everybody is calling it as evergreen revolution. It is possible. Evergreen revolution is only possible when you have permanent solutions, when you have respect for our nature, when you have respect for our natural resources, and try to use it in the way in which nature does it and provide solution to things. Yes, you all know that the natural, from Fukuoka said, nature left to its own will have a perfect balance, but somehow we have not done it due to some reason. In future also, if we respect the nature and go along with the nature, and there is a lot of scientific documents and literature and everything is available, I request our own scientists to go further on these things so that we can find a solution in this light. It's only we are looking at a different dimension. We looked at a different dimension in 60s to produce a good food. Today we need to look at this dimension because that which gave immediate results and also a lot of solutions to our problems is showing it can crack. It's not a permanent solution. To get a permanent solution, we need to go for a holistic approach which can bring a permanent solution and evergreen revolution. Thank you very much. Thanks for patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Vasant Kumar, for a very interesting and informative presentation. For the concluding remarks now of the inaugural session, it's my pleasure to invite Professor V.S. Ramamurthy, Director of this Institute, NIAS.
Well, I belong to an age group and a family background where we were born in villages, grew among the trees and fields for some years, went through a schooling in concrete buildings, started working in an air-conditioned office, and finally left in a concrete jungle. So for many of us, what is being discussed here is something goes beyond us. I've been talking to Dr. Shetty for a long time. I said, even when I'm living in a concrete jungle, I want to have a small kitchen garden with a little bit of tulsi and rose and things like that. And then we had long discussions. I said, I don't want a fertilizer chemical based one, since anyway I am not interested in a commercial angle. why don't you tell me what is this organic about and how to incorporate it in my kitchen garden? That's how this discussion started. And I was pleasantly surprised to note today that Shetty seems to have changed his opinion and has become a pro-organic 100% today, which was not to start with. Anyway, one of the things which I have noticed in organic is that if you really look around carefully, go deep, many people have demonstrated more than once that their traditional systems are not inferior or in fact superior to many of the modern methodologies, which came for a specific purpose, immediate quickies, quick results, but sustainability is not a question, is a question. And whereas our traditional systems have been sustainable all the time for the thousands of years. The one which I used to miss is that we somehow have not learned to repeat our successes. And the kind of information flow from one to the other in terms of their experiences, this has not kept pace with the modern systems of communication. Information about fertilizers and modern methodologies, including GM food, flows across the continent in half a minute through the internet. But organic farming information doesn't flow as fast, particularly from one farmer to another within the same country. This is one lacuna which we need to address. We have to somehow find methods of disseminating information much more effectively than what we are doing at the moment. The second, of course, was mentioned by the speaker today, the system somehow feels to believe that what is there in the backyard is not very useful. You know, the घर की मुर्गी दाल बराबर. What you see next door is not as valuable as what you get from somewhere else or far away. So this is a traditional human weakness which this needs to be also addressed in some form and say not necessarily always true. So this is the third thing which I keep in my mind is it is not one versus the other. There may be instances where you need to bring in some additional inputs, but it is not you always evaluate that, okay, either you do this or you do that. So I am not in favor of having organic versus non-organic. It's a question of what is the role, what organic can contribute and what the standard Western methods can contribute. There may be instances where one may be the other. As was mentioned, across the country the weather patterns are not the same and requirements are not the same. So some amount of balance is required, which requires that you have a dialogue between the two communities and not fight all the time between the two. Don't try to convince the other one, but to try to make use of it. This we see in our healthcare systems. You know, there was a time when Ayurveda was not recognized by the government of India. In the 80s and earlier, if you say, I want to go to an Ayurvedic system, then the government will say no reimbursement for you. You must go to a modern hospital. Then only you will get reimbursement. It is only in the 90s they started allowing Ayurveda. Then now they have integrated it into the system, and there are standard systems which based on Ayurveda which are available to the government system. So effectively we took some decades before you understand that okay, everyone has its own role to play, and organic is Ayurveda for the plants in my view. It's very, very similar, and we need to adopt systems where you learn from each other rather than try to avoid each other. And if we can do that, I think we will go a long way. Our tradition, Indian tradition, has a long tradition, and therefore rich Ayurvedic as well as rich organic practices which have been in place, and we have to make use of it and gain out of this. I hope the discussion in the next couple of days will lead to something which will go along addressing some of these issues. Thank you very much.